2 years ago, a month or two after I started here at Brooks, Miss Waters and Miss Shaniel said they would like to hear me give a chapel talk on why we do what we do in chapel. At the time, I said, that sounds great, I'll do it, once I know the answer to that myself. 2 months in, I didn't even fully know what we do, much less why we do it. So, 2 years later, with some experience behind me and some vision ahead of me, I'm ready to take a stab at it. And for the pieces that I inevitably miss or that change, I'll do it again in a year or two. When I think about what we do here and why, I keep returning to 3 areas. 1, we tell stories. 2, we ask questions. And 3, we explore and express our values. We do these 3 things many ways in chapel: spoken words, silence, music, prayers, meditation, and even physical symbols. Why do we tell stories? Because stories have the power to transport us to times and places we do not know. Stories allow us to tell the truth about ourselves, to reveal our perspectives on our life experiences. Stories, then, are how we make sense and meaning of our lives and the world around us. In a room packed with 400 people, all a bit restless and fatigued, I experienced a silence thick enough to touch. It was in chapel last year when Mr. Jones told us his story. I can also still visualize and even smell the unwashed feet of the traveling companions Mrs. Graham so vividly described in her stories about life as a wanderer. And I can feel in my bones the stories we heard through music last year on Martin Luther King Day, as Miss Shaniel's group, Confirmation, sang us stories of resilience, hope, suffering, faith, and liberation. In listening to each other's stories, we change. We find commonalities and differences. We might find that the story we assumed about someone else is a bit different than the story they tell. Neuroscientists are doing fascinating work around brains and empathy. They've discovered that in order to understand someone else as human, we must appreciate that they have a mind with the same capacities as our own. Meaning, we must recognize that someone has the same capacities for thought, emotion, and desire as we have ourselves. And if we do not recognize this, our brains associate them with characteristics that are less warm, less competent, less fully human than those we perceive as being more like ourselves. What neuroscientists have said shifts our brains to seeing persons and groups as fully human is hearing their stories, imagining their perspectives. The process can begin with something as simple as a language shift. We call it people-first language. They are not the homeless or homeless. They are persons experiencing homelessness. Persons with differences in abilities. I think this is what Miss Emily and Marie Claude were trying to accomplish by showcasing the artwork of the Hailsham students in our summer read. Shout out, Mr. Carpentier. If people could see their full humanity or their souls in the stories that their artwork told, they wouldn't be able to rationalize using their bodies and discarding them. The greatest travesties against other human beings begins with the subtle, persistent ways we dehumanize other people or tolerate the dehumanization of other people, often without even knowing we're doing it. And we counter that. We resist it. We literally take control of our brains by listening to other people's stories. So words, music, and art tell stories that connect us to our own humanity and that of others. Physical symbols also tell stories. We have symbols right here in the Frank D. Ashburn Chapel. At the back of the chapel, the tablets there tell the stories of Brooks alums who have died in military service to the United States. Above the door is a flag, you may have noticed. Each star on that flag represents a Brooksian who served their country during World War II. Their stories are a part of our story, together, in this space that is about us and about more than us. The cross that we have up here at the front also tells a story. It tells the story of our Christian and our Episcopal heritage, and it also tells the story of a particular human. Regardless of whether you identify as a Christian, Jesus' human story is a compelling one. It's a story of profound, embodied love, of radical, transformative inclusion, of peace and healing. That story, symbolized by the cross, invites us to love ourselves and each other in stubborn and fierce ways. So no matter who you are or what you believe, perhaps we can meet together in the story of love. The second reason we have chapel is to ask questions. 2 summers ago, at a hot, dusty ranch in the mountains of Wyoming, I spent a week with Rabbi Sandy Sasso. I still remember the exact words she used to open our week together. Religion isn't about answers. Religion is about questions. The Jewish tradition believes that sacred texts and stories are the beginning of conversations about God, ourselves, and each other. Amos Oz, a renowned Israeli author, said, "Some live life with exclamation points. I prefer to live my life with a question mark." When we engage stories and life with question marks, we enter into conversations with those stories and with each other. We discover new meanings that grow, deepen, and shift as we ourselves grow, deepen, and shift. In his chapel talk last week, Jason Gold invited us to ask questions. What does it look like for us to engage life at Brooks? What does it look like to engage each other? What's stopping us from engaging something we're curious about? What's stopping someone else? What have we learned about ourselves, our passions, and our gifts? How does that impact our future? One of my favorite quotes by Czech poet Rania Maria Rilke says this: "Be patient toward all that is unsolved in your heart, and try to love the questions themselves, like locked rooms and like books that are now written in a very foreign tongue. Do not now seek the answers, which cannot be given you because you have not been able to live them. And the point is to live everything. Live the questions now. Perhaps you will then gradually, without noticing it, live along some distant day into the answer." For 2 years, I have been living into the question of what we do in chapel and why. And I will keep living into it, hopefully in conversations with each of you, as we try and find answers and new meanings together. So ask the questions. Live the questions raised in this space, whether it's in someone else's story or in your own moments of contemplation and silence. And finally, chapel is about exploring and expressing our values. We come to our shared values by many paths, some by way of a religious tradition, some through our understanding of what it means to be human and to live a meaningful life. We sometimes explore those different paths, but we also spend a lot of time on our shared values. We have core values here at Brooks, and I hope that by the time you graduate, you might be able to name them. In the past month, we have explored and expressed the value of engagement. Later this semester, we're going to hear about passion. And we will have a thread that runs through this entire year of chapel where we explore the value of integrity. But I want to say just a few words about our values of community, unity, and inclusion, about how we explore and express them in chapel, and why. In his chapel talk last year, Mr. Hesse shared why he loves to sing and why he loves to sing loudly, which, by the way, is why this year I strategically positioned him and his advisory group right there in the middle so we can all enjoy his musical enthusiasm. You're welcome. In his talk, Mr. Hesse described a moment of communal singing in his youth, and it moved him profoundly. The text of the hymn, the words, spoke of peace. But the words weren't what moved Mr. Hesse. It was the act of singing together, singing in a round, singing in harmony. Mr. Hesse said, the music embodied the ideal of harmony. The voices could each stand on their own, but when they combined, blending and harmonizing, the depth of their beauty becomes apparent. They do not tolerate one another, merely living in peace. Instead, they celebrate, they elevate, they glorify one another. Sometimes, hopefully most of the time, the words of our music express our values of community, unity, and inclusion. Always, the act of singing together expresses our values of community, unity, and inclusion. We breathe together when we sing together. Again, quoting Mr. Hesse, when we sing together, we shine together. We demonstrate our love for each other, our care for each other, and our joy at being together. We embody and celebrate all that is best about this great school. In a 1969 sermon, Mr. Ashburn talked about chapel as the heart of the school, of the community. Physically, the chapel is in the center, the heart of our campus, and we come to it from all of the school's parts, and then we scatter back away from it into our days. The way blood flows toward the heart to get oxygen and then flows back out to nourish the rest of the body, chapel interrupts the normal flow of our classes to help us attend to our heart, to give us life-giving oxygen, sweet air to breathe as we move back into our days. Mr. Ashburn hoped that all who sit in this space might find unity, connection, and ownership in the community. This is why we say our community benediction together at the end. He also wanted you to find comfort, peace, quiet, and healing. And this is why I offer you a blessing at the end of every service. It's the blessing of peace and love that Mr. Ashburn longed for everyone here to feel and to know. Like the experience of solidarity as we sing together, the experience that transcends the words we use, we hope that the physical act of being together in the heart of our campus, in the heart of our days, will help foster the values at the heart of Brooks. The value of community that includes each of us, each of our stories, and each of our questions. So I'm going to close our talk by introducing our final song, which I hope will offer the embodied experience of community and inclusion. Mr. Griffith is going to lead us in Draw the Circle Wide, which beckons us I like the anticipation, which beckons us more powerfully than my words to keep trying, keep showing up, keep singing, and keep drawing and redrawing our circle wider and wider. So, Mr. Griffith, if you will.